Good. Today's sermon title is, Why Did God Pick a Loser? A lot of the heroes in our Bible aren't necessarily perfect. They didn't perfectly behave. Many of them would have been locked up in a prison today had they been alive today and committed what they did in biblical times. So today's story is about a particular loser, gentleman by the name of Samson. I think we probably have all heard about Samson before. He embarrassed his parents. Kids, you guys have never done that to your parents, right? And adults, you never embarrassed your parents. Well, Samson was really good at embarrassing his parents in their community. He caused tremendous tension and even started something called a war with other nations because he had serious problems. He had a pretty serious lust problem. He had a gambling problem and general foolish behavior. Followed this gentleman named Samson. Does that sound familiar? It sounds like every person's childhood, possibly. Samson was really good at it, though. We cannot argue that he was chosen by God. He was chosen by God. He was set apart for service. Question this morning is, did God then keep Samson in the Lamb's Book of Life? And we always say, are you in the Lamb's Book of Life? Is your name written down in glory? Do you have a home in heaven? And that's the question today about Samson. All the messing up that he did God keep him in the fold? Well, the Bible tells us a great deal about Samson, and it reveals even more who God is and how God brings his will into fruition. God is an amazing spirit that is able to take all of our mistakes and use them for his glory. We're going to see that this morning as well. We like to think about God in many ways as God utilizing the most upright and moral and Christian human options out there. You know, we're going to be voting on Tuesday, and I haven't heard anyone say, finally, we have an upstanding moral Christian candidate running for office. I hear a lot more, who are the less of two evils that we're going to vote for on Tuesday. And we think this is what God uses. We hope that God, would take the most upright standing person who's never done anything tremendously bad and use them for accomplishing his will. And he does, but then God oftentimes uses the most unexpected people to do whatever he needs done. And we're going to read about that this morning in Judges 3. So if you do have your Bible, go to Judges 3. That's where we're going to be spending the majority of our text this morning. As we studied before in the book of Judges, Israel disobeys God. It's a 7-time cycle in the book of Judges. Israel does not follow what God has told them. God puts them in a time of judgment, hence the book of Judges. They're usually in slavery by an enemy for a period of time. They repent while they're in slavery. God then again pours out his blessing, sets them free, and then they mess up once again and they go back into judgment. 7 times that occurs in the book of Judges. Well, we're going to pick up in Judges 13 and verse 1, and we're going to find out again a time of judgment when Samson was alive. Judges chapter 13 verse 1, it says, and the children of Israel did again. Okay, parents, you ever say that to your kids? You did it again. Samson or the children of Israel, they did it again in the sight of the Lord, did evil, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. Now, I know some parents who would like to ground their kids for 40 years, but that's pretty extreme. Well, God grounded his children for 40 years and put them underneath the Philistines' rule. During these 40 years, it's a long time of judgment, and God, even in the midst of that judgment, was raising up a deliverer to set the Israelites free and judge the Philistines. Samson's story begins in a place called Zorah with a man named Manoah and his wife. Never learned his wife's name, so we'll call her Mrs. Manoah. And who up to this point, these two, husband and wife, they could never have children. They tried and came to the point in their life where they said, we'll never have a child, and that's just the way it is. Until God sent a messenger to Mrs. Manoah. In verse 3 of Judges 13, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, behold now, thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now this man who came to her, whom she suspected to be an angel, she didn't know it, gave her specific prenatal instructions for her soon-to-be pregnancy. Our friends were just over last night, and they just became grandparents as of 2 weeks ago, I think it's been, just a week. And already they're questioning who their pediatric doctor is going to be for their newborn. Very important, and it has a lot to do with, do you want your kid inoculated day one, or do you want to hold that stuff off? And some doctors won't even take you if you don't believe in booster shots and all that good stuff immediately. So this was interesting because even before she got pregnant, the angel gave her all kinds of prenatal instructions of what she needed to do with this upcoming pregnancy. And Judges 3:4 goes on, it says, now therefore, beware. And I want you guys to remember this word, beware. I pray thee, this is the angel speaking to her, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. It goes on in Judges 13, verse 5. For though thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head. Now this is a big thing for women, especially when they have a little boy with curly hair. My wife is debating when to cut Jonas's little curls. I said, when we cut those curls, he's going to look like a little man and not a little baby anymore. Well, this mom was happy because she didn't have to cut a little baby's hair. That was one of the rules. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So let's talk about it, because this is a jam-packed verse. Who are the Nazarites? This was a small group of people that God set apart, dedicated themselves to holy ministry. So it wasn't necessarily something that you were born into because your mom and dad were Nazarite. In this case, they were not Nazarites. God chose him. He will be raised as a Nazarite. Now, let's just stop for a second, reflect on what we've just read. Samson was not even yet conceived. She wasn't even pregnant yet. She didn't go to the DG and get a pregnancy test. We're way before all this. Before he was even conceived, but when he was conceived, he was already going to be part of this special group called the Nazarites. So even before he was born, while still a developing embryo in his mother's womb, she, as his mother, had to follow the strict dietary rules so that Samson would not be defiled even in the womb. So when does God declare life? When the baby's born or at conception? It's extremely clear. In this case, even before he was conceived, everything was already set forth. Not even born, and was a chosen warrior who would begin the process of delivering Israel from the mighty Philistines. A unique life began at conception. I want all of you to know that your unique life also began, like Samson's, at conception. We're called to be the voice of the silent. We're called to be the voice of the people who cannot speak for themselves. So beware of who you vote for come Tuesday. So the not yet prego wife told her husband the message about this guy showed up and told me, I'm going to get pregnant and the kid's going to be a boy and he's going to be a Nazarite and I got to eat special foods and I can't cut his hair and I can't drink anymore. Maybe she's a big drinker. I don't know. And his her husband, Mr. Manoah, was disturbed by this. I think I would be too. I mean, maybe they were going to a fertility clinic. I don't know, but someone shows up and says, you're going to be pregnant. All right, let's jump forward to verse 8. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, oh, my Lord, let the man that talked to my wife, let him come and tell me what is going to happen with this future child of mine. Now, understand the angel already gave instructions to Mrs. Manoah, yet God was gracious and sent the angel once again to repeat the same thing to the husband who wasn't believing the wife so much. So Mrs. Manoah was out working in the field and the angel appeared. She ran and got her hubby. He's here. Hurry up and come out and talk to him. So Manoah arose and went after his wife in verse 11 and 12 and came to the man and said unto him, art thou the man that spakest to my wife? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, now let thy words come to pass. How shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? The angel repeated the exact same rules that he had already told his wife. And in verse 16 tells Manoah didn't know the man was an angel. He had no clue that this man was an angel, just looked like a regular human being. And Manoah was the type of guy, when anything special happened in his family, he wanted to celebrate, kind of like a Baptist would. And hey, let's have a fellowship dinner, right? So we're celebrating God's communion day and we're going to eat. Well, Manoah, this is a pretty big deal. They didn't have a baby. And all of a sudden, he's heard that he's going to have a baby. Not only is he going to have a baby, he's going to be a chosen warrior of God, a Nazarite set apart. Pretty cool stuff. So he entreated this man, you've got to stay for supper. Please, please stay for supper. We're going to kill the fatted calf. I don't know what they had, but he said, we've got to celebrate everything that you've shared with us. Verse 16 in Judges 3. And the angel Lord said unto Manoah, though thou detain me, and I can see this guy, just grabbing somebody, you've got to stay. Though thou detain me, I will not eat of your food. And if thou wilt offer burnt offering, thou must offer it unto the Lord. For Manoah knew not that he was an angel of the Lord. Now, Mrs. Manoah speculated that he was an angel, but Mr. Manoah wasn't having it. So this is a pretty interesting thing that happens here. Still Manoah prolonged the visit, asking that what the guy's name was. What's your name? Where are you from? Tell me about your parents. Where'd you go to school? Whatever questions he was asking. Finally, the angel made it clear that he was from the heavenlies. I'm not from around here. I've come from a faraway place with a message from God, and this is not going to be a dinner date. The miracle of fire and the joining of flames to heaven set Manoah straight. Verse 22, and Manoah said unto his wife, we shall surely die because we have seen God. So the guy said, I'm not staying for dinner. What you can do is offer a sacrifice unto God. So Manoah said, okay, I'll do that, right? Offer this burnt offering. So they got the sacrifice prepared, they lit the fire, and the angel called the fire down upon it. You read in Judges between the lines. And when that fire lit up, the angel ascended in the flame to heaven. This is what caused Manoah to say, verse 22, we shall surely die because we have seen God. Okay, he remembered all the stories his daddy had told him. You can't see God. If you see God, you're going to be dead because we're going to die. Now, thank God, Mrs. Manoah was a little bit more stable and sober-minded than her freaking out husband about what he just saw. And we read her response, in verse 23. But his wife said unto him, if the Lord were pleased to kill us, we'd be dead already. Basically what she said. He would not have received a burnt offering and a meat offering at our hands, neither would he have showed us all these things, nor would as at this time have told us such things as these. He's not going to kill us. He just got done telling us we're going to get pregnant, we're going to have a kid, and the kid's going to deliver us from the Philistines. Relax, sweetheart. So understand what is happening thus far, and a little background on Samson and where he came from. Now, clearly, Samson's dad wasn't a very confident nor commanding man. We might even call him a weak man in today's terms. Yet it was God who chose him and his wife to be Samson's parents. Note to parents, just when you think you're not qualified to be a parent, just like both Joseph and Mary were not qualified, who am I to be this chosen carrier of the Messiah? Samson's parents felt the same way. I'm not qualified to raise these kids. God calls you and makes you qualified. Take that to heart this morning, just like he did Samson's parents. He's called you and he's qualified you. In Judges chapter 13, verse 24, it says, and the woman bare a son, called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him, just like he promised he would. Now, Samson was just a young man when his life's ultimate purpose began. I say a young man because I'm old now. A young man, I'm talking around near 20 years old or so, still a young man. When his life's ultimate purpose began, his mission began, this is kind of where he starts to embarrass his parents, with his lusting after a foreign woman. Remember, the Philistines were ruling Israel. Israel kind of stayed to themselves, but Samson was a guy that got to go out and explore places. Well, he went into a neighboring town, saw a beautiful foreign woman. On a walk one day, his flesh took over, and he ran back to mom and dad and said, I just met my future wife today. She is smoking hot. We need to get this wedding planned immediately. Can you guys imagine this? You're an Israelite mom and dad. You've been teaching your kids who to choose, who not to choose. Make sure she's a Bible girl. On and on it goes. It's probably the same mantra you've told your kids over and over again. Be careful who you choose for your spouse, because you're going to be with them for life. Be careful who you choose, over and over again. And I'm sure Samson, like our kids, oftentimes try to wear us down, make us see their point of view. It's not a big deal that they don't believe what we believe. It's not a big deal that they don't even know how to spell church. It's not a big deal. And well, fortunately for Samson, he had strong parents that came to this, and Samson's dad said no. Well, Samson's dad wasn't a young spring chicken anymore. Samson was 20 years old and probably ripped. Samson didn't take no for an answer. He said, well, whatever, I'm still going to marry this attractive foreign lady who worships gods that we don't believe in. The answer was no to his lusty son, but that didn't stop Samson. He did not take no for an answer, and his weak father eventually gave in. Neither mom or dad know this was God's plan. Mom and dad didn't know that this was actually God's plan for him to get married to this Philistine woman. This is where God goes off the tracks. You're like, wait a second, God, I thought you wanted my kid to marry another. I'm not saying this is God's plan for our kids, but definitely this was God's plan for Samson. We read this in verse 4 of chapter 14. But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought occasion against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Find this uncanny that, we have infiltrating countries coming into the United States, and they're using the lust of some of our politicians to get inside the government, to find out things. We find out that we have insiders being the limo drivers of high-ranking officials, and that partition glass in the limos is not as thick as they think it is, and they get to hear all the secret phone calls, and you just imagine what's going on. Well, God had a plan. Philistines are rolling over us. I'm going to send in a guy to infiltrate the Philistines. Maybe this is where the bad guys get all the ideas. All right, let's move on to verse. Let's talk about this for a second. Samson did help things, but actually made things worse with his lust issues and his gambling problem. Because of his great strength, He could do things normal men could not do. One day he was going down to visit his lady, and there was a roaring lion along the path. And the Bible tells us he didn't have any weapons, so he used his hands and tore the lion's mouth right apart. Not normal for human beings. Not even a very strong man could have done that, but he could. Days later, he walked by that same lion carcass that now was all dried up alongside the road, and honeybees had made a honeycomb in it. Well, he had a gambling problem, so he took the information about his ability to kill a lion, and then later on, his carcass full of honey that he took and sampled as well. Samson also was extremely smart. Not only was he strong, but he was smart. I've told my kids, we always have the joke of the big dumb jock, right? He's as strong as an ox, but he's dumb as one too. But I've met, and I told him about a guy that I knew in high school who was a giant, huge ox, and he was also the valedictorian of his class. You usually don't see that happen. Samson was both. Extremely smart, extremely witty. So he came up with a riddle challenge, and he presented this riddle challenge to his new Philistine's wife family members. 30 young men who were also probably young strapping guys and smart and sharp. And he said, how about if you solve this riddle, I'll give you 30 changes of clothes. 30 outfits, ladies. Now, mom says you get 2 outfits for the beginning of school and we're done. We're not spending any more. How would you like to get 30 new outfits? This was the gamble. But if you don't get the riddle, Sam said, you got to buy me 30 new changes of clothes. The guy said, the 30 men said, no problem, we'll take the bet. Well, he told them the riddle. He told them the riddle, and we find out they couldn't figure it out. This is what he said to them. Out of the eater came forth meat. This was the lion that he killed. And out of the strong came forth sweetness. That was the honeycomb that was in the carcass later on. And they could not, in 3 days, expound the riddle. I'm sure they probably Googled it and everything, and they still couldn't figure it out. They were 3 days. We do not have an answer for this riddle. We're going to have to buy this guy clothes. Not good, not sounding good for these guys. So when you don't have the answer, you find out who does have the answer. They couldn't. They went to Samson and said, tell us the answer. He said, I'm not telling the answer. You still got a few moments left to figure it out before the time limit's over. So what did the 30 guys do? They couldn't figure it out. So they made his new wife, probably a cousin, maybe a sister to these guys. They made her try to get it out of Samson. Now, ladies, you know when you need something, even young girls from their daddies, they try to sweet talk. They wear us down. They use all the tactics that their mama taught them how to use on a man. Either get out of a speeding ticket, or get what you want, or get to go somewhere, or stay up late, or whatever it was. And because of Samson's weakness with lust, she finally got the answer out of him. She immediately shared it with her relatives, and they came over to him gloating that they've magically figured out the riddle. Samson's no dummy. He figured out what had happened, and it angered him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He went down to Ashkelon and slew 30 men of them, took their spoil, and gave exchange of the garments unto them, which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. It's not going to run into J.C. Penney and order 30 outfits. I'm going to go down to another Philistine village, kill 30 guys, strip them of their clothes. There's your clothes. That next town could have been friends and relatives of the 30 guys that solved the riddle. It says his anger was kindled, and look what he did. He didn't go back to his Philistine wife who just betrayed him and told a secret. He went back to his daddy's house. He's still ticked off, but his anger was kindled. You guys get that? Pretty amazing. He just killed 30 guys. Now, he's back at his father's house, and he must have been quite angry with the manipulation his new Philistine wife had just put him through. Months later, not days later, months later, Samson returns to his wife. Probably had 2 houses, right? Went back to his wife months later. And when he gets there, he finds out that his wife is now with another man. His wife's dad thought that Samson wasn't coming back. I thought you were super ticked at my daughter, so I gave her hand to another guy. Turns out the guy he gave her to was Samson's buddy. Double whammy. That hurts. That hurts at the core. Now remember, Samson has a temper problem. He didn't take this news very well either. In fact, he was beyond triggered in our political sense today. Where Samson got his ideas to quench his anger, I don't know. But maybe he had a Pinterest account because he got super creative with how to quench this anger. Can you imagine trapping 300 foxes with your bare hands? This is what Samson did. Trapped 300 foxes with his bare hands, took 2 foxes, fastened their tails together. You guys have ever seen a fox even play by themselves? They're all over the place, springing around. Now you tie 2 foxes' tails together, they're just going to go in circles. Well, Samson knew this, so he put a torch, lit the torch, and let these 150 paired foxes to go in the Philistine land. Now, we've had some pretty dry weather here lately, right? I was burning some leaves and other debris that we've cut around our property just yesterday, and it went up real quick. Samson let 150 paired foxes go with torches between their legs, and they destroyed all the cornfields, all the vineyards, everything that the Philistines were growing, including probably lit up some of their houses and burned down towns. This is what Samson could do. One man, and God gave him the strength to do it. And he immediately destroyed the countryside. What does that mean? Well, you and I are like, not a big deal. You know, our freezer broke down and everything went bad in it. We threw it away. We called the insurance company. They said, we'll give you $300 for go back to the store in town and buy some new food. Didn't work out this way. Family was going to go without corn this fall. Family was going to go out with wheat and barley, no bread. People were going to starve. This was a serious problem for the Philistines. And they got angry. They got angry that he had did this to them. But they knew that they couldn't touch Samson because he was untouchable. Guy was incredibly strong. Like, okay, we can't beat up Samson. What can we do? How can we get back on what he's done to us? Let's find out. They needed a target. Remember that. When people get angry, they have to blame somebody. They're not going to blame the big guy that could smash their face in. They had to find somebody else. Verse 6 in chapter 15, then the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law to the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her his companion. And the Philistines came up to his now ex-wife. They burned her and her father, i.e., they burned her entire family. So the Philistines turned on their own people and burned them up because they brought Samson into the fold. Samson was responsible for doing all these horrible things to their land. Samson got mad, super mad, that they did this to his ex-wife, father-in-law, and all the relatives that he probably called family. He probably got along with some of them, right? He was really upset after that. So he came after them with a great slaughter, the Bible tells us. Came after the people responsible and wiped out a whole bunch. Well, they're upset again now. Darn it, he came after us and killed a whole bunch of us. We got to get him back. All right, let's go beat him up. Now wait, he's still strong. We can't. How can we get Samson back now? We killed his ex-wife and all of her family. So they said, we're going to go to the Israelites, his blood, and we're going to go kill them. So Philistines went up and they encamped, they entreated around his family members, Some of them, the Israelites, went and inquired, why are you guys camping close to us? They said, because Samson killed a whole bunch of us. You, Israelites, you need to deliver Samson into our hands. It's the right and responsible thing for you to do. So they were entreating the Israelites to go and tell Samson, Samson, you're messing up. If we don't turn you over to the Philistines, they're going to kill us. Now, you don't want that to happen, do you, Samson? Samson probably was like, no, I definitely don't want them to kill you. Samson couldn't be in two places at one time, so maybe they'd split their army up, and Samson could guard one place at one time, but he couldn't guard all places. Said, if we bind you up, we put handcuffs on you, deliver you to the Philistines, think they're going to be quenched, they're not going to come and try to kill us. So Samson agreed, and they bound him, and they took him to the Philistines and delivered him to them so that they could save their own hides. We go on to verse 14 and 15 in Judges chapter 15. And when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon Samson, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt in the fire. The bands loosed from off his hands, and he found a new jawbone of an ass, put forth his hand on the bone, took it, and this is where we actually get a number, with a jawbone, killed 1,000 men. Just sliced them up. At this point in time, the Philistines were pretty much defeated. We can't do anything to this man. They're ready to throw in the towel and just, I don't know what they're going to call a truce. Let's put up a fence. Let's put them in a territory that they can hang out in. We won't bother them. But God wasn't done yet with the Philistines. The judgment wasn't over for them quite yet. Samson, because of all of his mighty things, and I see fitting, Israelite needed a hero, and he was their hero. So they gave him the office of president, i.e. they gave him office of judge, and he was their judge for 20 years from the time after he killed 1,000 men with the jawbone. And he ruled Israel for these 20 years. Now he was no longer a 20-year-old man. He was a middle-aged man. And he still had a lust problem. And again, he lusted after a Philistine woman. Her name was Delilah. And he visited her often to bed with her. Well, the Philistines, remembering that he had a lust problem, said, Delilah, we need your help. We need your help to defeat this man. He's been holding us in bonds for 20 years. He still can't touch him. He's still an extremely strong man. And they constrained Delilah to find out the secret of his great power. Well, again, Samson was no idiot, so he gave Delilah false information many times, and every time they bum rushed his tent or his house to try to take him captive, Samson completely destroyed the guys that came in. But finally, she wore him down. She cried, if you really love me, all the manipulation that she learned, and she finally broke Samson down. He finally said, it's my hair. It's my hair on my head that's never been cut. That's where my power was. And you guys can imagine, 40-some years old now, Samson probably thought that his great strength was natural to him. He's always had it, forgetting that his big locks of hair were the actual source of his strength. So while he was peacefully sleeping one night, his new bed girlfriend cut his hair off, tied him up, called in the soldiers, and they were able to restrain him with no problem. He was like any other man. Immediately, the Philistines gouged out both of his eyes, tied him up to a grinding wheel, and Samson spent not just days, but weeks, months, and years walking in circles, spinning the millstone, grinding their grain for them. That was his prison punishment. You guys remember the word that I told you to remember at the beginning of our text in chapter 13. The word was beware. Samson forgot that word. And he has fallen into a big problem. No army could defeat this man, but one selfish woman did. Because of it, he lost his eyes, and now he's literally going in an endless circle for all he knows for the rest of his days. The superhero was now an aging blind man. But unbeknownst to the Philistines, each and every day his hair was growing and growing and growing. He was finally in a position to end the Philistine tyranny against the nation of Israel. Well, it just so happens at that particular time in the story of Judges, there was a huge aristocratic party happening, was going on for several days. And all the political people, all the hobnobbers and influential TikTok influencers were going to be there. Just going to be a huge gala, drunken festival of all the VIPs of the Philistine political and military and socialite group. After about a few days, everyone was gathered together under one roof, and they had all been drinking. They were very, very merry, the Bible tells us. And they said, let's call Samson out of prison so that we can make fun of him. You know, he held us under rule for all those years. Let's make some light with Samson. They said, great idea. Sent the soldiers to bring him out, brought him out in front of them in this humongous building. This large theater could max out at 3,000 people. What's the Kovalchik Center hold? Is it 5,000? So a little bit smaller than the Kovalchik Center in town. 3,000 people maxed out for this big old party. It was at this point in time that Samson's moment to take what he thought mission impossible and turn it into mission complete. Read in chapter 16, verse 25, and it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, they said, call for Samson that he may make us sport. They called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him in between the pillars. Now, you construction guys out there, these are what we're going to call load-bearing pillars. That's where they put them. Verse 28, Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, this one last time, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Jump to verse 30. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all of his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than he slew in his entire life. Amazing ending to a loser's life. Called upon God one more time and said, God, I've messed up so many times. Give me strength one more time. You see how God used this loser for killing 3,000 of the Philistines' greatest military and political figures was the end of the Philistine tyranny for Israel. It was after this that Israel once again became the great rulers of the territory. Many wonder if suicide is the unforgivable sin for a Christian. What we just read, Samson did a kamikaze that day. Suicide is not the unforgivable sin for a Christian. It's rejecting Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. That's the unforgivable sin. God allowed him to take not only himself out that day, but 3,000 pagan enemies with him to set his people free. How do we know Samson wasn't judged for his Christian suicide? Well, he shows up in the hall of faith in Hebrews 32. What shall I more say? For time would not fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and of Samson. One day you're going to get to meet this modern day Hercules. That's where the Greeks got their idea for Hercules. You guys know that, right? The Bible tells you the truth, and then the Greeks make up some fake god. Samson was the real Hercules. That was the stories of old. One day you're going to get to meet him in heaven. God did not make Samson a lustful, gambling, foolish man. God did God make him weak to a lying, crying, manipulating woman? No. But God knew that Samson would be all of these things, and he used his weakness and gave him extra strength to destroy the enemy. How else could an Israelite get an audience with the entire Philistine government to eliminate them all at once? I mean, we have laws today that our president and vice president cannot be in the same airplane. We wipe them all out. The government would surely go down real quick. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Philistines weren't that smart. They got them all together at once. God said, I'm going to take them out. Samson was indeed a loser. Think about it. He lost his wife, and then he lost his wife's life because of what he did. I mean, I was responsible for her murder and her death, and my father-in-law, maybe who he liked. We don't know. He lost a huge gamble. He lost his integrity. He lost his superpowers. He lost his authority as a judge. He lost his eyes. He lost his life. Drove his parents crazy. Yet, by taking out the Philistines, he broke the back of the evil nation, which resulted in Israel's freedom. He was God's man for the job. I want you to understand that God calls all kinds of people, even losers. Some point in our lives, I think we've all called ourselves losers. Man, I'm such a loser. If you're a good parent, you say, no, you're not. We've all called ourselves a loser at some point in time. Even Samson was called a loser, but I like to remember him as being called faithful. Let's stand and pray this morning. Gracious God,